Welcome to tonight's PETA Town Hall meeting with PETA President Ingrid Newkirk and PETA Director of Laboratory Investigations Justin Goodman. Ingrid and Justin will be on the line shortly to discuss PETA's expose of the cruel psychological experiments being conducted on baby monkeys at a National Institutes of Health laboratory. They will also be happy to take your questions about PETA's vital work for animals in laboratories. If you have access to a computer, you can also stream this meeting at www.peta.org/October Town Hall. Once logged in, you can type in your question for Ingrid and Justin and listen to the town hall without using your phone. We encourage you to join us for the online webinar presentation. Again, join us for this visual presentation at www.peta.org/October Town Hall. At any time throughout tonight's call, you can press 0 to ask a question of Ingrid or Justin. You will speak with a PETA staffer who will record your question and then put you back into the call so you can listen in until it's time to ask your question live. And at any time during the call, you can also press 7 to make a donation to support PETA's vital work to get animals out of laboratories. And one good thing about today is that your gift will be matched dollar for dollar. So again, at any time during tonight's PETA Town Hall, you can press 0 to ask a question or press 7 to make a donation. Since we expect a high volume of questions, we may not get to everyone's during tonight's PETA Town Hall, but a staff member will follow up with you and answer your questions if we can't get to it live on the air. So for those of us just joining, welcome to tonight's PETA Town Hall meeting with PETA President Ingrid Newkirk and PETA Director of Laboratory Investigations Justin Goodman. My name is Jordan. I'll be the moderator for tonight. As I mentioned, Ingrid and Justin will be on the line shortly to discuss PETA's expose of the cruel psychological experiments being conducted on baby monkeys at a National Institute of Health laboratory. They're excited to take your questions about PETA's vital work for animals in laboratories. If you have access to a computer, you can stream this meeting at www.peta.org/October Town Hall. Again, that's www.peta.org/October Town Hall. We encourage you to join us for the online webinar presentation. Another thing just to point out, at any time throughout tonight's event, you can press 0 to ask a question of Ingrid or Justin, or you can press 7 to make a donation to support the vital work PETA is doing to get animals out of laboratories. Remember, your gift today will be matched dollar for dollar. So with that, we'll now turn it over to PETA President Ingrid Newkirk and PETA Director of Laboratory Investigations Justin Goodman. Ingrid?
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for being with us this evening. I'm talking to you from rainy Norfolk, Virginia, where we are expecting winter on the way. I know it's afternoon for those of you on the West Coast, and I'm sure the weather is much better there. This is our 4th town hall of 2014, and we have very much to cover, so I hope you'll stay with us throughout the entire call. At the end, we will answer any questions you may have, and we would also love you to leave a message for PETA's team of scientists who are working very hard to get companies and governments, not only here in the U.S. but elsewhere, to replace animal tests with modern cruelty-free methods. So please stay on the line. Before we start, I do have some unrelated but interesting news. The Maharashtra, India State Board of Education is about to implement a policy which will be the first of its kind in the whole world. And the policy bans students and staff members from wearing leather shoes. So this means that they will all have to switch to animal-friendly canvas. And that's something PETA India has been pushing hard for a while. This decision is really important because it applies to millions of school children. And from our perspective, it spares millions of cows and other animals from the knife. Again, it has nothing to do with the topic, but I couldn't resist mentioning it. So tonight, we're going to hear from PETA's Justin Goodman. Justin is the director of our Laboratory Investigations Department. He's our dynamo who oversees PETA campaigns that expose cruelty in laboratories. He's helped PETA uncover abuse and violations of animal welfare laws in labs all over the world. And he's helped us modernize government and corporate testing policies and countless cruel experiments on dogs and cats and monkeys and pigs and rats and frogs and other animals. He and his staff advocate strongly for the use of state-of-the-art non-animal methods to replace animals in experiments in education, and even in medical training. Last year, Justin and his team won the Lush Prize for Public Awareness. This is an award for the effective use of undercover investigations, whistleblower exposés, corporate negotiations, which we also do, and PETA-style unmissable campaigns to bring about life-saving changes for animals who are unfortunate enough to find themselves caged in laboratories. Justin put his skills to good use once again in the case we're about to talk about tonight, which broke as an exclusive story on CBS News. In a nutshell, in late 2012, PETA discovered that government experimenters were videotaping some terrible studies in which hundreds of monkeys are bred to be prone to mental illness, and then they're taken away from their loving mothers on the day they're born or just a few days or a little while afterwards. And the reason they're taken away is to traumatize them. That's the absolute purpose of it. It's not incidental. We submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the National Institutes of Health, asking for all the videos they had taken of these experiments. And NIH tried to thwart us. They tried to charge us $100,000 to get these materials, but we didn't stand for it, and our lawyers successfully challenged the fee assessment. Much to NIH's chagrin, we ended up getting all their footage at no cost, which is exactly what the taxpayers and the public should pay for it. It took 9 months, and 9 months later, we received more than 500 hours of video and hundreds of photographs that showed these baby monkeys being subjected to terrifying psychological experiments. We also got documents containing great detail about the experiments. This was an incredible amount to wade through, as you can imagine, months after months. People were watching tapes in our office and going through these documents. And I'll fill you in a minute in what we uncovered. But let me just say, please, throughout this call, if you have a question for either of us that comes to mind, just press 0, and that will connect you with a staff member at PETA. They'll take your question, and then they'll put you back into the call until it's time to ask it live. We have many wonderful people, super supporters on the call tonight. So if you get your question in, but we don't have time to answer it today, I promise you we will get back to you without fail in the next couple of days. If you're joining us online, you simply type your question into the comments field at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get that too. And if you find yourself moved by PETA's work to get animals out of laboratories, please do consider supporting us by pressing 7 to make a much appreciated donation. We can't do it without you. PETA has launched a global Stop Animal Tests Challenge, which gives everyone the chance to have their gift matched this evening, dollar for dollar, which means, of course, it will go twice as far to help protect animals used for experimentation. But now for more details of our NIH case, let me just turn everything over to Justin. Justin.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. First, thank you everyone for joining us and for your support, which makes investigations like this one that I'm going to discuss with you possible. As Ingrid mentioned, we learned that experimenters at the NIH were tearing hundreds of baby monkeys away from their mothers at birth, locking them in tiny cages, and then intentionally terrorizing them with mechanical snakes, loud bangs, and human adults wearing scary masks. The monkeys endure these terrifying, distressful, and sometimes painful experiments for years. And it's all been happening behind closed doors at an NIH laboratory in Maryland, actually not far from our office in D.C. And here is where more than 200 monkeys are being currently used in these maternal deprivation and depression experiments that have been going on for more than 30 years. And guess what? Taxpayers like you and I were the ones paying for it. And that's what my colleagues and I at PETA, including a former NIH neuroscientist, discovered when we obtained these footage and these photographs that were taken between 2009 and 2012, and these experiments are still ongoing. In early September, as Ingrid mentioned, we launched our campaign to expose these wasteful, archaic, and cruel experiments. In addition to CBS, news outlets around the world reported on it, from the United Arab Emirates to Germany. Every year at NIH, dozens of baby monkeys are being intentionally bred to be predisposed to depression and other mental illness. They are then permanently separated from their desperate mothers within hours of birth and given only a cloth-covered bottle to cling to for comfort. These deliberately orphaned infants suffer from anxiety, fear, depression, and some are so distressed they bite into their own flesh and rip out their own hair. Now, to test the severity of the mental illness they cause, the experimenters restrain these tiny infants in mesh cages that they can barely stand up in and place them in what's called a startle chamber. And in the videos we obtained from NIH, the experimenters deliberately scare the babies who are locked in this small cage with loud banging noises or powerful bursts of air. And as you might imagine, these tiny babies are desperate and they're crying out and trying futilely to hide and escape these loud sounds. In other recent experiments that we obtained videos of to test the baby's anxiety, infant monkeys were caged with their mothers, who were placed in infant car seats and chemically sedated to make them pass out. In the videos, you can see the terrified and confused infants screaming and crying as they're climbing onto their mothers and frantically shaking them. They're just seeking some protection and comfort, but the mothers are completely non-responsive. In the video footage, experimenters at the NIH can even be heard laughing while one of these mothers is struggling desperately to stay awake to comfort her distressed baby. As they grow older, some of these monkeys are then shuttled between other NIH laboratories and subjected to years of additional experiments. Young monkeys are restrained and injected with high concentrations of ethanol to turn them into alcoholics, which increases their anxiety, their depression, and their social withdrawal. And after what can only be described as a life of systematically induced terror, many of the monkeys are killed before their 8th birthday. Now, ludicrously, when PETA's expose broke, NIH made a pathetic attempt to defend this barbaric project and this video that we released by claiming that the laboratory is, and this is a direct quote, the laboratory is not that different from a human nursery, end quote. And obviously anyone who's a parent or anyone with an ounce of common sense would surely disagree. Now, these experiments are also part of a horrific legacy, and I'm going to leave that to Ingrid to discuss a little bit.
Yes, it's true. When Justin first told me about this, it rang a very ugly old bell. And if you are old enough to think that these experiments sound hauntingly familiar, as I am, you're absolutely right. You may remember the notorious experimenter Harry Harlow, whom author Laurel Braithman calls a dark lord of monkey torture in her book Animal Madness. And Harry Harlow, the Dark Lord of Monkey Torture, conducted these kinds of studies back in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. In those experiments, Harry Harlow took newborn mothers away from their newborn monkeys away from their mothers, and he gave some infants surrogate mothers. These were made of wire and wood, metal. And he kept other traumatized babies in isolation in these tiny metal boxes with solid sides, sometimes up to a year at a time. Realizing that such horrific conditions resulted in long-term debilitating psychological trauma for the infants, Harlow became excited and began expanding his project. He had a student back then called Stephen Suomi, and together they created what they called the Pit of Despair. This was a dark metal box that was designed to isolate the monkeys from everything in the outside world, and it caused them to suffer irrevocable psychological damage. They ended up rocking incessantly. They bit themselves, they clutched at themselves. and they ripped out their own hair, as Justin mentioned in these new experiments. And some were so shocked and so depressed that they simply starved themselves to death. These men did that to the monkeys. To see what would happen when tormented monkeys became mothers themselves, Suomi and Harlow created what they called a rape rack in order to restrain and impregnate female monkeys when they reached sexual maturity. Then they would later watch and photograph these mentally ill monkey mothers physically abusing and killing their own babies. They hadn't been mothered themselves. They didn't know what mothering was. And suddenly this writhing, crying being had come out of them, and they were afraid of those babies. It may not surprise you to learn that Harlow's protege, Stephen Suomi, is the experimenter who leads the current NIH project, and has been since 1983, which is soon after Harlow died. It was rotten science in the 1950s and 60s, and it's rotten science today. We consulted with independent experts in many fields, in the fields of mental health, medicine, anthropology, and primatology, including speaking to world-renowned primate expert Dr. Jane Goodall. And everyone agreed on this point, that it's rotten science. Dr. Goodall wrote as a statement, and in it she talks about the strong mother-infant bond that monkeys share. And she writes this, she says, during the early months, infants are totally dependent on their mothers for food, transport, contact, and protection. Any disruption of this bond during the early months of life is extremely damaging to the psychological and often the physical well-being of the infant, and sometimes the mother as well. Moreover, it is well known trauma in infancy can negatively affect adult behavior. That's what Dr. Goodall says. And she goes on to talk about being so shocked and saddened to hear about these experiments from us. She said the NIH's current maternal deprivation experiments on monkeys are, quote, extremely cruel and unacceptable. So, as all of you on this call know, non-human primates are extremely intelligent animals. They form intricate relationships, they experience a wide range of emotions, and they have the capacity for suffering that is just like the human capacity for suffering. Unlike humans, rhesus macaque monkeys, which that's the species used in Suomi's experiments, are highly social beings. They need companionship in order to thrive. They need a mother's love. And it's typical for infant macaques in nature to stay in constant physical contact with their mothers for the first month of life at least. And that the briefest separation is stressful for these babies. Chronic separation is devastating to both the infant and the mother. By the way, if you'd like to support our work, let me just say, please, anytime, just press 7 and you can make a donation. I'm going to digress a bit to say, I grew up in India. When I grew up in Delhi, monkeys were everywhere. We saw them everywhere as children. They were very naughty, many of them, and they refused to recognize property rights, so they would break into our school dormitories to see what treats we had brought from home, and then they would steal them and eat them or wear them. So I've seen that in their natural homes, which is so far removed from what they are experiencing at NIH, these gregarious animals live in multi-generational troops with up to 200 other monkeys, all their relatives. And they spend their days traveling miles. They go through lush forest terrain. They groom one another. They look after each other when not raiding dormitory lockers. But in laboratories at NIH and elsewhere, they're confined alone, absolutely alone, in metal cages that are so small that they can only take one step or two steps sometimes in any given direction. And most of them will die in those cages. That's the only life they will ever experience. The cheap plastic toys and the scratched mirrors that are given to monkeys in laboratories as what's called environmental enrichment, which is something required under the law, are no substitutes for the companionship of another living being, especially for an animal of this type, not an isolated animal. And rhesus monkeys have impressive intellectual abilities. They're very clever. They can count, they can use tools, they communicate complex information. They leave signs for each other at intersections out in the jungle to show which way they've gone. And they have their own language. They express empathy with each other, and they have a sense of fairness, something that many experimenters seem to totally lack. You may remember there was one particular experiment that was described in the late Carl Sagan and Androyan, her book called Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. And in that experiment, macaques were fed only if they pulled a chain that electrically shocked another monkey. And they could see that monkey in plain view through a one-way mirror, and they could see when that monkey was suffering from the electric shock. The majority of the monkeys preferred to go hungry rather than pull the chain. And one monkey refused to eat for 14 days rather than pull that chain and shock a monkey he didn't even know. So that's who monkeys are. And we know who experimenters are. So Justin, back to you if you'll tell everybody more about what Peter found out that NIH is doing to these poor monkeys.
Thanks, Ingrid. At the beginning of the call, I mentioned that taxpayers like us are the ones footing the bill for what Stephen Suomi is doing over at the NIH. And in the past 7 years alone, and again, we mentioned that this experiment has been going on for 30 years, but in the last 7 years alone, this project has received more than $30 million. Even though these experimenters have themselves admitted, and I'll talk about in a moment, that their work is not applicable to the treatment of human illness, and obviously it's incredibly cruel. In addition to Dr. Goodall, we've worked with many other respected experts who've joined this campaign to urge the NIH to end these experiments on baby monkeys and modernize its research program. One of these specialists is Dr. Barbara King, who's a Chancellor Professor of Anthropology at the College of William and Mary. She's an author who just wrote a book about how animals grieve, and you might have read some of her work on NPR. And she spent hundreds of hours observing monkeys and apes in the wild. And when she viewed this video and prepared a statement for us, she wrote, and this is a quote, "Taken as a group and without exception, these experiments are cruel, plunging infant monkeys into hellish conditions that they can neither control nor escape from. Ethically and morally, they have no place in science today. The cost to these animals is far too high." And then she said, "I cannot get the voices, eyes, and bodies of those little monkeys in the video out of my mind." And I do encourage everyone who's on this call, I know you're seeing some images on the website, but please visit PETA.org to watch the video for yourself. Now, perhaps the most damning response we got was the reaction of Dr. John Gluck, a psychologist who's actually a former primate experimenter, a student of Harry Harlow, and a classmate of Stephen Suomi. And when PETA sent Dr. Gluck copies of the protocols for these experiments, he told us that it was very difficult for him to read them because he can imagine exactly what was happening to the monkeys, because he had done it himself and seen it with his own eyes. In the statement he provided to PETA, which we've now provided to the NIH, Dr. Gluck wrote, "In the past, I conducted experiments on the impact of social deprivation on monkey intelligence and abnormal social behavior. I eventually chose to leave that area of research because I came to believe that those models did not accurately represent the development and presentation of human mental illness." He continued and he said, "I came to the view that those models could not adequately inform innovative directions for successful clinical intervention to justify the costs in pain and suffering to the monkeys. I see nothing to alter that view with respect to the program of primate-deprived early experience research currently being conducted at the NIH. And again, keep in mind, Dr. Gluck used to perform these experiments. He was a student of Harlow's and a colleague of Stephen Sumi's. So he is not an outsider. He is very much an insider and has seen this thing with his own eyes. So these statements and many others were included in a detailed report that PETA submitted to the leadership in person and to the at NIH and to the oversight committees at NIH that approved these experiments and approved funding for them. We know that those materials are currently being reviewed, and we've also reached out to every single member of Congress and their staff with a copy of the report and a letter asking that they intervene. Now, we've known for decades, even before Harry Harlow, we've known for decades that psychological experiments on monkeys do not lead to the development or improvement of treatments for human mental illness. And we can look back at Stephen Sumi's own publications. As far back as 1977, Stephen Sumi said, and this is a direct quote from a paper, "Whether actual data obtained from non-human primates have added measurably to our understanding of human development is another matter. Such cases are relatively rare." And again, this is Stephen Sumi saying that such cases are relatively rare where the data obtained from monkeys applies to humans. And unfortunately, after 4 more decades of these horrible studies that are still going on at the NIH, nothing at all has changed. In the 2014 paper that he and his colleagues published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, they said that these experiments cannot be applied to humans, that their maternal deprivation model has never been confirmed as a way to test treatments for mental illness in humans, and they acknowledged that the only way to test these treatments is in human beings. Meanwhile, we have researchers across the country who actually do study humans, our own species, conducting human-based research that benefits human health, and they're struggling to find funding.
Thanks, Justin, and everybody please support our fight to end these baby monkey experiments. And so please press 7 if you can share something that will go towards this campaign. I know that those of you who have been with PETA for a long time know that this isn't the first time that we've gone after the NIH for absolutely senseless and cruel, cruel experiments. One memorable case was in 1986, which of course is nearly 30 years ago. And then we received 70 hours of video footage of monkeys that time being abused in head injury experiments that were funded by the NIH. You may remember we made a short video that we called Unnecessary Fuss. We called it that because one of the experimenters was caught on his own videotape saying, "I hope the anti-vivisection people don't get hold of this. They'll make such an unnecessary fuss." Well, we considered it a necessary fuss, and we did make a fuss, and people were outraged. But again, I mean, it's a hard mountain to climb. NIH refused at first to take any action, and if they'd had their way, they would never have taken any action. Those experiments would have still been going on too. What we did back then is we hired a bus, and we shuttled 101 PETA supporters to the NIH campus. We went into one of the buildings. We knew it was where the director of these studies at NIH was holed up. We went to the 8th floor to his office, and we took over the whole floor, which sent all the NIH staffers fleeing. That was, of course, before 9/11. Nowadays, the security is much, much tighter, but we were very pleased to get in. And we expected to be there only long enough to make a point. But what happened was rather curious because the NIH police couldn't figure out how to arrest 101 people who were camped out 8 stories up in their building. So they tried freezing us out by cranking up the air conditioner, but we took the curtains down and wrapped ourselves in them and the park carpets. And they tried starving us out, but we found a way to rig up a pulley at a back window and we got food. And then one day, these days were going by, the Today Show managed to get us a message asking if I could come on the air. That was a tough way. We're 8 floors up, but somehow we did arrange a distraction, and I crept down a stairwell out of the building and did the Today Show. Afterwards, I got back to the NIH campus. I managed to get into the ground floor cafeteria, and I thought I'd have a cup of tea while I figured how to get back, if it was possible at all, to the 8th floor, when suddenly a police officer tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, you aren't supposed to be here. You're one of those protesters. You get back up there. And very proud of himself, he led me to the elevator and took me back to join everybody from Peter back on the 8th floor. But what happened was this, is that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who was then Margaret Heckler, sent someone over to the building to tell us that she had seen me on the Today Show, she had watched our video, and she was horrified. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And she was so horrified, she directed the head of NIH to cancel the head injury experiments they were funding. So we won that case for the monkeys, and we are determined to win this one. Anybody who knows Peter knows that we never give up. We will be rallying our members and our supporters constantly to help us keep the pressure on NIH, contacting members of Congress, contacting NIH, writing to the newspaper, putting it on their Facebook, sharing the video, doing everything everyone can until NIH ends its torment of these baby monkeys and their mothers. To date, more than 1 million people have viewed that video footage Justin talked about of these experiments. It's on our website, peter.org, and our Facebook posts about this case have reached more than 6.7 million people. Our youth division, which is Peter 2, posted this, and it caused such a stir that Facebook actually removed their post. But we fought with Facebook, and we got it put back up, and then it reached more than 2 million people. We've also had some luck with celebrities. We have longtime Peter friend Pamela Anderson, honorary director Peter's honorary director Pamela Anderson, as well as Noah Cyrus, Kellen Lutz, Vida Guerra, Amelia DeRaven. They've retweeted our tweet about these experiments, and they've reached millions of followers. With the help of generous donors Laurie and Carly McGrath, we did take out a full-page ad in the Washington Times. The Washington Times is read by every member of Congress and all the Washington insiders. NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins happened to be appearing on C-SPAN's Washington Journal TV show the day that ad appeared in the Washington Times, and the person interviewing him on the air showed him a copy of our ad and questioned him about these experiments, which was very good. He was pretty dodgy about it. He deftly said that, anything meaningful about these actions, he'll look to end them and so on. But what he didn't realize is that we were just getting started, and so his umming and ahhing didn't help. Last week, when NIH scheduled a live Twitter chat to promote a new brain research initiative, Peter and its supporters took over the discussion, and NIH's hashtag too, so that everybody looking for tweets about the NIH event saw our troubling photos and videos from the case instead. We've also, and all this takes money, which is why I tell you, please chip in if you possibly can by pressing 7. We have plastered DC Metro rail trains with 250 ads, and that will let the public and the NIH community, all these international visitors to NIH, know about this dirty secret. The ads are currently running on the Metro's Red Line, which includes the NIH station, the medical center station. And we've placed other ads inside the medical center station itself, as well as Union Station, Federal Triangle Station, places that are frequented by Washington lawmakers. So this ad blitz has got more press for the monkeys, and TV news outlets have been meeting Peter in the Metro station to report on the story. So, as you know, we can't do things like that without the support of wonderful members. So, again, please press 7 if you can make a donation. We would deeply, deeply appreciate it. And now I'll pass you back to Justin.
Thank you, Ingrid. In addition to reaching out to Congress through these ads in the Metro, through the newspaper ads, through email, we've been able to secure some meetings with key members of Congress who received our detailed report and the statements from the independent experts we've reached out to. They've also been receiving calls from thousands of PETA members, and because of this, we know that there are members of Congress right now working with us to prepare and who've already submitted letters to the NIH asking them to investigate how these archaic, cruel, and irrelevant experiments have been allowed to continue and ask for a plan to stop them. So if you're wondering what you can do personally, please visit our website, PETA.org, and when you go there, you can see the video, and also with a couple clicks of a button, you could send a quick message to the NIH demanding that it stop these experiments that were not acceptable 60 years ago, and they're certainly not acceptable today. To date, more than 125,000 supporters have already taken action. So please share the video on your Facebook page, on Twitter, and any other social media sites. On Instagram, I just saw Pam Anderson was sharing the tweet and the video again today on her social media sites. And of course, if you don't have internet access, if you're on the phone and you want to help, you can just call our membership services team, and the number is 757-622-7382 to get more information on other ways that you can help make a difference. And I'm just going to repeat some of that again in case I spoke too quickly or you didn't have time to grab a pen. If you want to help, go to PETA.org, watch the video, and you can click and send a very quick email to NIH Director Francis Collins and other key decision makers asking them to end this project. Also, please, please, please share the video on social media. Share the photos on social media. What makes more of a difference than anything is simply getting this information in front of people, and that will motivate them to join us to take action. And it just takes a few clicks. And again, if you don't have internet access and you want to help us, you can call Membership Services at PETA, and the number again is 757-622-7382. And there you can get more information on other ways you can help us make a difference. The overarching conclusion of PETA's review with our own former NIH neuroscientist and every expert we consulted with are that these experiments are completely unjustifiable from every single perspective. They cause these baby monkeys crippling emotional trauma. They have never led to or improved any treatment for human mental illness, and they are superseded by modern non-animal research methods that are actually relevant to human beings. It's 2014, and we're now in the age of brain imaging and other superior human-based research that actually allows us to study the causes and treatments of mental illness in humans without terrorizing animals in traumatic experiments like the ones happening at NIH. These experiments are obviously cruel and unethical, and they're really a vivid reminder of how vital our work is. And they're why PETA will never, ever give up the fight. It's shocking, of course, to all of us that the NIH has allowed these studies to continue for 30 years, but they can't go on any longer, and we won't rest until they're stopped.
Yes, Justin, I think Jane Goodall said that, and some other people have said that they thought these experiments died when Harry Harlow died, and they did not. And they've just been carried on in privacy somewhere in a lab in Poolesville, Maryland, and we need to just throw open the doors. And I think the force of public opinion, if we get out this video enough and we make enough of a fuss, a necessary fuss, that we can stop them. But as I say, it's going to be a hard fight. So everybody, thank you so much. Let's take some questions from people on the line and see what we have.
Absolutely. So our first question comes from Honeydew in Colorado. Honeydew, you're live on the air.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi. My name is Honeydew Murray, and I'm just questioning how the NHI got the authority to do these these cruel experiments without getting any supervision or any oversight from a higher authority. Who the high authority would be, I don't know, but that's my question. Is there some way to reach a higher authority besides politically, and encouraging that, insisting that they release these monkeys and have them have these experiments stopped?
There is, Honeydew. Thank you so much for asking the question, because a lot of people are under the impression, and that's because experimenters give them the impression, that there are all sorts of checks and balances and that they can't just willy-nilly do what they want. But in fact, a lot of these people get on a gravy train from the first time their experiments are approved, and it can be a way back. And then someone like Stephen Suomi is considered, a sort of... I was going to say eminence grise, but some sort of highfalutin NIH researcher, and nobody dare go up against him. I'm sure that Justin will have something to add. I wanted to say DHS, Department of Health and Human Services, just as with the time of Margaret Heckler, could take action. The Congressional Oversight Subcommittee could take action. A lot of times it takes a lot to get them to take action because it's science, But also they've got these often absolutely lousy and ineffective institutional animal care and use committees that just sign off on anything that's presented to them, whereas they do have an obligation under the regulations to see other alternatives to the use of animals that the researcher wants to get money for, and if there are, they have to do something about it, or at least push for the use of those other methods. But yeah, the oversight is more or less a myth. But Justin, you may wish to throw your weight behind that question.
Sure. I thank you again, Honeydew, for the question. And Ingrid covered that pretty well, but I'll make a couple comments specific to the NIH. I think most people will probably find it shocking that the United States Department of Agriculture is the agency that has authority over experimentation on animals in laboratories. Yet the one area where they have very little authority and cannot even conduct an inspection is in federal laboratories. So even though the USDA is the only agency that can actually inspect a lab and make sure it's complying with the law, they are explicitly written out of the regulations that allow them to go into a federal lab. So the NIH operates as an island unto itself out in rural Poolesville, and the other agencies that are supposed to be making sure animals are not being abused in laboratories, by law, cannot go in there to take a peek and see what's going on, which is another reason why it makes it so important that, PETA through whistleblower exposés and undercover investigations and FOIA are able to get a glimpse into what's happening. So number one problem is that there is virtually no oversight by an external party who doesn't have a stake in what's going on. And I think a perfect example of that is the project proposal for these experiments. There are several boxes you can check that describe the pain and distress that animals in your experiment are going to be experiencing. And for this project that was just reapproved in April 2014, the box that was checked on this application and the one 3 years before that and the one 3 years before that, the box that was checked for pain and distress said that the animals in these experiments will not experience any pain and distress. Now, anyone who listened to what Ingrid and I have been saying for a half hour, or who even sees a photograph, never mind the video, will be obvious to them that there is substantial pain and distress associated with these experiments. In fact, that's what they're designed to do, cause pain and distress. But they checked this box that said there was no pain and distress, and because they checked that box, then the application basically gets green-lit. They don't have to search for alternatives to animal use, and there's very little scrutiny of it because it seems harmless. And that's how little attention the people reviewing this project are giving to the details. There is a project designed to cause animals pain and distress, and the box that's checked says they won't experience any. And that's what we're up against. We're up against a Mickey Mouse oversight system that rubber stamps anything that comes across the desk and has no one to be accountable to, except the public who pays for these experiments, who they typically don't listen to unless there's massive public outrage, which we're trying to generate here, and members of Congress. And that's why I've been spending time on Capitol Hill rallying members who are, upset that this is going on because it's cruel, and upset that people that what they see as their tax dollars that they're giving to the NIH are being wasted on this stupid and cruel experiment. So the short answer to your question is there's very little oversight, and that's where our job comes in to help force the hand of the NIH.
Great question, Honeydew. Remember, folks, if you have a question you'd like to ask tonight, press 0 on your telephone keypad, and press 7 if you'd like to make a donation. Again, that's 0 to ask a question and 7 to make a donation. Our next question comes from Maureen in Thunder Bay. Maureen, you're live on the air.
Hello. Yes, I was just wondering why. I realize that it's very difficult to do this, but the NIH, I was just wondering why higher-ups cannot charge them for mistreatment of these animals and the barbaric, inhumane, and unconscionable tests that are being conducted. There has to be a way that they have to be charged through the courts, so they can never put an animal through this again. As nobody should be put through this, and animals are equals, and they have as many rights as we do. So if anybody else can go through a court system, the macaques certainly are obliged to do the same, and somebody should stand up for them, as PETA has done, as many activists have done. But the court system should be looking into this and take up the fight.
It's true, Maureen. Thank you so much. And thank you for saying that just like us, they are us. It's all one thing. Of course, what they've done is exempt themselves, basically, from the same laws that anybody else has to follow. We were able to take a court case against an experimenter who got NIH funding, who was conducting his experiments in a state lab many years ago. You remember the Silver Springs monkey case and Dr. Edward Taub. But that was because he was acting in the state. They are conducting these experiments in the federal facilities, which are exempt from anything but federal law. And the federal law that applies, of course, is the Animal Welfare Act, which Justin just said the USDA doesn't have the ability or probably interest, but to go in and take any action. It's not criminal, it would be civil. But they have basically taken themselves out. They're above the law. That's one of the reasons they're so high-handed and they feel so confident in what they do. Now, there are other experiments going on in state facilities, in university laboratories, where some of these monkeys are shipped to. And again, in those states, most of the state statutes exempt any activity that causes pain and suffering if the animals are being used in experiments. And if they're being used in federally funded experiments, then state authorities are extra cautious and reluctant to take any action, even if there isn't an exemption. It's happened. Where we can find a way to do it, we do it. But at the NIH, I think it's unfortunately impossible, and the funding just has to be cut off, and the pressure has to be put on from Congress, and so on. Do you think that's right, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly wherever we can, we try to use the law creatively, the paltry laws that do exist to protect animals in laboratories. And we've had examples in the last few years where we've been able to get laws, state cruelty laws applied to experiments on animals in some creative ways. But ultimately, as Ingrid mentioned, in almost every state, there is either a complete or partial exemption for cruelty against animals in laboratories. And just a quick example, before I came to PETA, I was a graduate student at the University of Connecticut. And we were trying and successfully did shut down brain experiments on monkeys where these monkeys were having holes drilled in their skulls. And there were similar experiments happening to cats. At the same time, we were protesting these experiments, there was a man in another part of the state who was actually put in jail and deported because he put a dog in a crate in his basement and drilled holes into his head because the dog was acting aggressive. And so this man was put in jail, charged with a felony, and deported, and at the same time we had experimenters in the university literally being paid millions of dollars to do the same thing to animals in their laboratories. So we have this legal double standard, that if something happens in a lab, it's science and not cruelty. And of course, compassionate people and a growing proportion of the public don't, agree with that and are fighting hard to change it. But I will say, we don't need the courts. The courts are a useful tool whenever we can use it, but we do not need the courts to stop what's happening at the NIH. Of course, if there's an opportunity, we will use it. But what is going to win the day is ethics and science and public pressure. And we've seen examples of that, all year. Every year we see examples of that in our own work. In the case of chimpanzees and the NIH stopped experimenting on chimpanzees after approving it for years, not because they wanted to stop, but because the public pressure and pressure from Congress was unbearable and they had to do something. And they ultimately did the right thing, and we're confident they'll do the right thing here. Again, we just have to bring that pressure to bear.
Great question, ma'am. So our next question comes from Christy in Wisconsin. Christy, you're live on the air.
Hi. I was wondering, you had mentioned that you had done some protesting actually in the buildings. Is there going to be anything like that done at their facilities where the testing is being done?
Well, NIH is pretty much a fortress since 9/11. In fact, to get on the campus, you have to go through quite a rigmarole with bomb detection things under the car and all sorts of what have you. But that's not to say that there won't be protests. So please get on the website, follow what we're doing, and I imagine that there may well be protests because they'll be there or somewhere else because people are so upset. But at the moment, what we're trying to do is argue the science with them, argue the funding issue, argue the cruelty more than anything, and try to get members of Congress and the scientific community to demand the end of the experiments. But please stay tuned.
Yes, I just like to add to that quickly. If you know anything about us, we use every tool in the toolbox. So a couple of weeks ago, Stephen Sumi was speaking at a conference at the Royal Society of Psychiatrists in England, and we were there, and someone who was very well dressed, holding a nice PETA sign, speaking very loudly and clearly, got up in the middle of the room while he was speaking and told the room about what really went on in Stephen Sumi's experiments that he was describing to the room full of people. And next week we're actually going to be speaking at the meeting of the town hall meeting of the little Poolsville, where the experiments take place. There's a number of residents who are members of PETA, and we're going to be going there and confronting the town's leadership and asking them to take action to kick this cruelty out to the curb. So there's plenty of stuff people can do physically by going places, and as Ingrid said, stay tuned, but there's a lot you can do online and by picking up the phone and by sending a tweet. So yeah, please do follow the work we're doing. Every little bit counts.
And one thing, of course, is that Congress is out, and many of the members are in their home districts available. They're having surgeries, or whatever they call them now, to talk to their constituents. And it is important to arm yourself with this information, and please go and see your members of Congress if they're home in your district.
And we're happy to help if you need fact sheets or anything. So please send an email to PETA, and we can provide you with whatever you need to drop them a visit.
Thanks for that question, Christy. Remember, folks, press 0 if you'd like to ask a question tonight, and press 7 if you'd like to make a donation. Ingrid, before we go to our next question, can you just say a few words about the difference a donation makes and the vital work that PETA is doing?
Certainly, absolutely. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. It's everything. We can't move without the fuel that we need. We have all the wherewithal, we have the details, we have the information, we have the interest, we are motivated, and we are desperate to stop cruelty to animals. And we do stop it. But really, It's a matter of we can do so much more. Those ads I mentioned, I mean, they cost paper money. I mean, that it has to, the bills have to be paid, and so we can. Only thing we can do is just appeal that everyone get together and please do what you can do. Use your voice, use your pen, use the internet, enlist your friends, get your member of Congress, but please do help us financially so that we can do the maximum we can do and not let NIH take a step without running into one of our ads or running into somebody with a placard or whatever. So thank you very, very much for helping us.
Thanks, Ingrid. Remember, folks, your gift today will be matched dollar for dollar. So if you'd like to make a donation, press 7. Again, press 7 if you'd like to make a donation. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, press 0. Our next question comes from Pat in Chicago. Pat, you're live on the air.
Hello.
Hi, Pat.
Hi. Yeah, I just wondered how receptive Congress has been. Do a lot of them respond and, say positive things that they agree with you, or most of them negative? I just kind of wondered what the overall response was.
Justin?
It's been very favorable. There's a whole group of members of Congress called the Congressional Animal Protection Caucus, and there's many dozens.
Good.
Yeah, so there's many dozens of Congress people who support, either sponsor or co-sponsor or otherwise support various animal issues. So we have friends on the Hill who supported our work previously, and I can tell you that members on both sides of the aisle were really disturbed by the footage and interested in getting involved in how to stop this. One sore point for Congress is that they give the NIH $30 billion a year, but there's rules written that Congress cannot say how that money is spent. And members of Congress are resentful about that, as they should be. So when they see something horribly cruel and egregious like this, that money is going to, it really motivates them to do whatever they can to have better control over the public's money. So again, people are very motivated. They took the lead on getting these letters out and are very fired up. And they need to hear from as many of us as possible. That is key. I can tell you that one impassioned phone call from a member of the public, from their constituent, can get a member of Congress to write a letter to the NIH. That's all it takes. A polite but impassioned plea to them to get involved and ask questions to the NIH is all it takes. So please remember that your voice matters. Making a phone call, sending an email, those things matter, because I hear about it on the other end. When I walk in for a meeting, they'll say, I received a phone call, or we received 100 emails about this. We plan on doing something. So please do that if you haven't.
Great. So Ingrid, I think we're wrapping up. But did you want to say a few words before we close?
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody very, very much. If you submitted a question and we didn't get to it, and I'm sure there are many, we will get back to you. Within the next couple of days. And I ask everybody, please, if you have a second, to stay on the phone. You can leave a voicemail message for our scientists. They really are splendid people, and they do work tirelessly to get animal tests replaced with non-animal tests in all sorts of places all over the world. And they would love to hear that you care about that and that you're our supporters. It means a lot to them. So please stay on the line after the call and leave a message for Peter's Laboratory Investigations team. And please don't be shy. Ask that question that you might have been thinking about but didn't get a chance to register. And let us also know if you have suggestions for any future town halls or calls. So thank you. Thank you very much from Justin and from me for your support of our work. It means the world. We would not be able to do it without you. So thank you, and all the best until we talk again. Bye-bye.
This concludes today's PETA Town Hall. Thank you.